Hello and welcome to Prosper Sustainably's presentation on developing tribal environmental laws. This is a re-recording of a presentation made during the live webinar on July 1st due to technology issues. My name is Josh Simmons and I am an attorney, consultant, and collaborative strategist with Prosper Sustainably. I founded Prosper Sustainably in 2014, and this firm assists individuals, organizations, and tribes with a variety of environmental and sustainability needs, such as the development of EPA tribal environmental plans, strategic planning, grant writing, project management, feasibility studies, business planning, and other services in addition to environmental and land use code drafting. Prior to founding Prosper Sustainably, I was the director of the Santa Ynez Chumash Environmental Office for about 7 years, and during that time had a lot of success in transforming that environmental agency into one of the nation's leading tribal environmental agencies. During that time, secured a lot of funding, grew our programs from about 2 to 20, and increased our staff from 1 to 15 staff members. And I've been working since then through Prosper Sustainably to help bring other tribes similar success. I've also instructed various courses with different nonprofits and government agencies also at UCSB. I'll get to more of those in a moment. Some of my consulting experience includes drafting the environmental code for the Cabazon Band of Mission Indians. This was a comprehensive environmental code including environmental review, air, water, waste, underground storage tanks, chemicals, and hazardous substances ordinances. In addition, since 2009, I have been instructing tribal waste code development courses on behalf of the Institute for Tribal Environmental Professionals. I've also taught an environmental code development course on behalf of the ITCA and taught some similar things at UCSB. I have done 3 EPA Tribal Environmental Plan Development Consulting projects since Prosper Sustainably was founded. I performed the project with the Rincon tribe last fall, and I'm currently working on strategic planning and ETEP projects with both the Pala and the Hoya tribes. Last fall, I also assisted the Chemehuevi tribe in developing their GAP work plan, and last September, I assisted the Pala tribe in securing $220,000 for a rooftop solar photovoltaic system for their fire station. I would not be a proper attorney if I did not have a legal disclaimer, so I want to read the following information to you. So this information provided in the webinar is intended to help you better understand the process and available resources for drafting tribal environmental laws. Any person seeking to draft or enact a law, develop or implement any regulatory mechanisms pursuant to a law, or otherwise apply the educational information that I am offering during this webinar should seek the advice of a licensed and qualified attorney. And I want to make another note that in terms of both tribal environmental law, they're both unique areas of law, and that a general attorney will not necessarily know the implications and nuances of this. So, my recommendation would be to work with somebody who has experience and expertise in both tribal and environmental law. During this webinar, I'm going to provide an overview of how to develop a tribal environmental law. The approach I'm going to share, the step-by-step approach, is similar to what I've been teaching during the ITEP waste code development workshops. And since then, I continue each time to further elaborate, refine this process, and develop new templates. So these templates and other resources, including an extensive database of tribal environmental laws that I've developed, I'm going to demonstrate and share with you after following the webinar. I will not be focused on legal considerations such as jurisdiction or enforcement. Those would require a longer webinar, longer presentation, and just to give you some context, the tribal environmental codes or the tribal waste codes workshops that I've instructed through ITEP have been about 2.5 day workshops. So I'm going to be covering a lot in a very short period of time, and I want to focus more on the process and share some of how that process is being applied. There'll be a little bit of overlap with jurisdiction, enforcement, and other types of issues. At the same time, though, I don't have time to get into detail, and they can be complex, and they vary from tribe to tribe. You know, keep in mind too that this webinar and content is focused on tribes with federally recognized lands, trust lands, and so some of the considerations, especially in terms of jurisdictional considerations, would be different for, say, Alaskan or Hawaiian tribes, or non-federally recognized tribes, or even tribes that are federally recognized that do not have trust lands, federally recognized trust lands. I'm also going to review the draft Cabazon Environmental Code and show you how I've applied some of the step-by-step process and content, and show some novel approaches to meeting some of the needs and challenges that you probably are experiencing in both enforcing and crafting your environmental laws for your tribe. I already mentioned some of the areas that law covers. I'll talk about the approach and considerations, and I'm also going to briefly show you an environmental review checklist which flows down from the Cabazon Environmental Code, and it's more of an implementation measure following the code, but I think it'll be valuable for you to see. Just briefly, I want to go over some terminology that I'm going to be using throughout the webinar, and just know that some people use these words different or interchangeably. This is how I'm going to use them. So a law is going to include a code, an ordinance, a statute, or a regulation. A code itself is, to me, a series of laws. So if you go to municode.com and look up the codes there, typically there's a structure, series of laws that have usually numbers associated with each one. A statute or ordinance, on the other hand, is that the actual law adopted by a legislative body. So code may be a series of statutes or ordinances which can be updated or expanded from time to time. And so in the case of a tribe, it may be a law adopted by a tribal council if that tribal council has the authority to adopt a law, and that may vary from tribe to tribe. I'll get to that more in a moment. A regulation is a rule adopted pursuant to an ordinance or statute. That regulation must be consistent with the ordinance or statute, so it cannot be in conflict, and it cannot cover areas that were not necessarily allowed by the ordinance or statute. And a regulation typically will cover gaps that in areas that were not covered by the statute, which are still within the same scope of the statute, or may also provide more detailed requirements. So just to let you know where we're going and what steps are involved, I'll give a short rundown or a brief rundown of that. One of the first steps, and just so you know, these steps are not necessarily meant, well, they can be done in order, but you may find that you may need to pursue some of the steps sooner rather than later, and they can be done simultaneously as well. I think what will likely be one of your priority and first steps is going to be scoping, really identifying what are you trying to cover and how are you trying to cover a particular area of law. So if you're focused on air, water, or waste, if you're doing an environmental code that's comprehensive, that includes many of these areas, you need to identify, okay, what are the issues and objectives you are seeking to address? What are going to be some of the enforcement options you want to include? What enforcement capabilities do you even have to pursue different options? It's going to be important to know and to integrate into the law. And also, what resources do you have available or do you need to effectively implement and enforce these laws? At some point, and probably very early on, you're going to need to review the tribal constitution and other governing documents. These are going to dictate what can actually be included within the law, how it can be administered and enforced, and also what is the process for enacting that particular law. And there's the other governing documents could be things like articles of organization, resolutions, and I'll get to describe more about that later on. During this process, you'll also be researching and reviewing similar laws, and this can be both laws that the tribe has already adopted, but also laws that have been adopted by other tribes or municipalities, governments, so that you can find examples of language and other information that you may want to include in the law, the tribal environmental law that you're drafting. You're going to have to draft or revise a tribal environmental law. If you have an existing one, you may be focused more on revising depending on how far along that is and how appropriate it is to your situation. And that can be simultaneously with that research and review process. And throughout this process, at least at the very end, if not throughout, you're going to be presenting and going through reviews of this with your leadership, including your council. You may have a planning or steering committee who's focused on developing this law, providing feedback, and legal review as well, which I think should be going throughout the entire time, but you'll definitely want a final legal review and sign off on this. And then from there, you will then proceed to getting the tribal environmental law hopefully adopted if you can get sufficient votes. And once you have it adopted, you will begin implementing it, which is an involved process, which can also take many years. Although if it's crafted properly, you should be able to begin enforcement in certain areas right away. Some other things may need to be fleshed out a little more before they are fully effective. So in terms of scoping, this is an ongoing process, something you want to be doing. If you learn of new circumstances and new goals, you want to come back and make sure that you include those. So during one part of the scoping process is identifying the issues and objectives to be addressed. These issues could be specific, meaning specific to the area you're focusing on. So if you're focused on an air ordinance, what are the issues, the air quality issues, the air resources issues you want to focus on? Do you want to tackle greenhouse gas emissions? Are you focused on open burning, fugitive dust? If it's waste, do you have illegal dumping going on? Do you want to focus on the collection and management of waste? And it may be all these things. And what are your objectives? What are you seeking to accomplish through the law itself? You also want to consider some general issues and objectives, and these could take many forms. They can be focused on the culture of the tribe. There may be consideration for cultural resources, let's say in the environmental review. If you develop an environmental review ordinance, you may want to consider what the impacts are going to be to the tribe's cultural resources. There may also be social implications, like one of the objectives may be, and issues may be unemployment and trying to encourage workforce development. And then your tribe may also be trying to promote economic development, and you have to grapple between the ability to promote economic development and also on the other side to regulate economic development, and what are the implications of the laws that you're putting in place. You'll want to focus on both current and potential issues. So you know what's going on right now. You'll want to go back and see what's happened in the past as well. So there may be some issues that have occurred before that may reoccur again. And then what do you anticipate coming down the road in the future? Are you installing a wastewater treatment plant within the next 5 years? And if you are, do you want to incorporate that into the water quality ordinance that you are now currently developing? It may make sense for you to do that. It also may make sense for you to wait if you don't know enough about that wastewater treatment plant. What are the community objectives for the resources you are seeking to regulate? So an example here would be if you are seeking to protect sensitive habitat areas let's say a riparian buffer zone for a habitat and wildlife that are near creeks and other waterways. You want to protect those from development, damage, and other issues that could occur that could threaten or harm the wildlife and habitat. But is that in line with the community objectives for those resources? The community actually instead want to see those resources developed. They want to see those resources harvested. Would they like to see things like trails going through those? So are you going to entirely protect those from human access, or is there going to be some level of human access and perhaps harvesting of those resources? There's various objectives for identifying, there's various methods for identifying issues and objectives. When I work with clients, I tend to do a very thorough document review and information request. I want to go back and see their environmental inventory, their planning documents, their assessments, see what they've identified as issues and objectives within those documents, if there's any strategic plans. It also gives me a sense of what's going on. Even if you work for the tribe and you feel like you know everything that's going on, I think it's still beneficial to go back and review these documents and extract out the issues and objectives, create a separate document where you keep track of these things to make sure you don't miss anything. Because if you approach this with everything from within your head, then it's likely you're going to end up missing something that's possibly critical. And you would have to go back and revise the law, which could be problematic or just a significant process. Other ways that you may or may not choose to do are community surveys and workshops. And for any of this process, I think I didn't mention this as one of the steps, but you should not begin this process of developing a tribal environmental law without making sure you have the support of leadership. And then as you're proceeding and gathering information, you want to make sure you have the authority and approval to gather it from people and sources of information that may be sensitive. So your tribal council may not want you to do a community survey or workshop about this law, or they may want you to. It may be something where you don't feel like you're going to gain a whole lot of additional information from that beyond what you already have, or you have surveys and workshops you've already done in the past that you've been able to identify relevant issues. So, discuss the issues and objectives with the leadership, with other staff members, with supervisors, partners, and stakeholders. But make sure that you're doing that with the approval of tribal leadership and whatever steering committee you may be working on. And then as you proceed, make sure you're tracking those sources of information and listing and organizing your findings. And I'm going to show you both a document information tracking template that I've created and also a scoping template for when you do identify issues and objectives, so you can keep track of those. And then if you are going to be engaging the tribal community through surveys, workshops, and other means, then use this opportunity well, because if you're in a situation where your tribal council or your general council are the ones that need to approve this law, getting their support and getting it early is going to be crucial for you getting this law passed. It's also an opportunity to educate them on the issues, challenges, and opportunities associated with these environmental resources. So, you'll get their feedback. You'll get them more involved. They'll be more aware of the environmental impacts that are occurring within their community and what the options are for handling those. Also, during the scoping process, you want to identify and consider your enforcement options and capabilities. So the enforcement options can be things like the penalties and remedies that you want to impose. What penalties and remedies are being imposed under existing tribal laws? Is there any limitations on the penalties and remedies that can be imposed under your governing documents, such as the tribal constitution or other laws? But also, what are your options and what are your enforcement options? What are your enforcement resources? who do you have available to enforce this, and who is going to enforce this? Is it going to be the environmental department? Do you have a tribal compliance department or a tribal compliance person who does all the compliance related stuff? Is there going to be certain elements of this that are going to be enforced by the tribal police department, or if there's some overlap, let's say with open burning, the tribal fire department? And so, and this could be one of those, it could be all of those, depending on how you craft the law. So what are those options? What is workable? What resources do you have? What funding is available? So if your compliance person is currently doing all the other compliance and likely will be the best person to do this, how are they being funded? Are they funded by the tribe to do this? Are they funded by various grant sources to do enforcement for other programs? Are you going to have to provide additional funding for them to do enforcement? Are you going to need additional staff members to do this? And what types of resources do you have available for things like standard operating procedures, forms, so on and so forth? And we'll get actually more to available and needed resources in a moment. At this time too, consider what are your enforcement alternatives, both legal and non-legal. So non-legal means of enforcement might be community education outreach. If somebody is violating a tribal environmental law, the first step I think is always to go out there and speak with them. They may not be aware of what they're doing or the impacts or what the impacts are of what they're doing. It may have been an accident. A law itself will hopefully be a last resort. It's good to have it in place so you do have that fallback authority to enforce it upon somebody if need be. But I think developing and maintaining good relationships can be crucial to best protecting these resources and making sure that everybody wants to be a good steward. That ongoing community education outreach, just so people are aware of what is required and what is not required, providing guidelines for best management practices. These are things that are alternative non-legal means, but in terms of legal means, what are your enforcement options? Who is available to enforce it? So the last kind of aspect of the scoping process that you're probably doing simultaneously or should be doing simultaneously when considering the other areas is what resources do you have available and which do you need to implement and enforced. Here it says tribal waste law, but your tribal environmental law. So the funding, the enforcement officers, what forms, what documents, what procedures, what infrastructure, what the enforcement process is not, it's not just the compliance officer going out there who's issuing citations. It's not just let's say the environmental department, if that environmental department is the administrating kind of enforcement body, but who's going to conduct the hearings? If something has to go to a hearing, who's going to conduct that? And typically it's good to have that be separate from the enforcement body. So there may be a committee that you want to establish, that the tribe wants to establish to do hearings. Is there going to be that intermediate body that does the hearings, or is this going to go straight to the tribal judiciary system? And then what are the resources available in the judiciary system? Who's going to be prosecuting these things? So if it goes to the tribal court, is there a tribal attorney, or will there be a tribal attorney who will be involved in this process, either prosecuting or for guidance? These are all things that need to be considered ahead of time in crafting the law, and you may need to incorporate language into the law addressing these areas. So another critical step in this process is going to be reviewing the tribal constitution. Oh, well, before I get to there, let me show you some of the templates and resources I promised. So give me a moment while I open those up. First of all, let me show you the internal document and information tracking template. This is a very simple example, a very simple template. I provided a little bit, some examples from when I was working on the Cabazon codes project. I deleted most information. This document before had probably 30 to 40 entries in it right now, and most these were all fleshed out for the most part. Um, this is customizable, so the document or information that you have either requested or have received, what category, so what does it apply to? Is it, in these two cases, these are general categories, but is it if you're doing an air ordinance, or let's say you're focused on open burning or different issues, you can categorize what the information or request applies to. What is the status of that? So has it been requested? Has it been received? Has it been reviewed? If it has been requested but not received yet, when is it expected? If you have any comments in terms of I suppose the request, and then if you have any comments after you review, you can put those there. So this can be something where you can add additional columns if you want to keep track of other information that you may find valuable, but I think it's important to keep track of the information and documents you've received, because if you don't, then you tend to lose track of where they're actually at, and knowing what information you have on hand, so you're not asking people for the same things over and over again. And so this has been incredibly useful for me, and a little bit of time spent doing this saves a lot of time in terms of repeating actions that you may repeat without this kind of organization. So here's the environmental law scoping template that I want to share with you. And again, like, there was a lot more information. This was fleshed out a bit more. I'll go through it. This is an area where, as you're going through those documents that you've received and you review them and you identify key issues, challenges, opportunities, whatever it is that it might be resources that you either need or are available. As you learn information about those, to keep track of what those issues are that you want to have somehow addressed within the code, and then what is the source of that information. You may add some comments too. So to be able to keep track of all those things is, I think, critical, because then when you're drafting your code and when you're researching and drafting, you can make sure that you actually are addressing everything that you want to. The scope of the code or the law, the environmental law, will cover the scope of what you're intending for it to cover. So you may refer back to this throughout that process of the research and the drafting, just to make sure and check these things off. And you may identify some possible issues and objectives that, even though you put it here, you may come across that underground storage tanks are an issue that you think you may want to address, but maybe you don't have the funding to develop a law that focuses on that. Maybe you only have one underground storage tank within the reservation, so it's not that big of a deal. So it helps you keep track of the scope and both expand and contract it as needed. So in this case, the first column is the issue and the objective. There's different areas that you're focused on. These are broader areas. You may want to be more specific with your areas. So, underwater, you may, if you want more distinct sections focused on non-point source versus point source discharges, you may put non-point source here instead of water, and you might put point source discharge for something else. As you're identifying different issues and objectives and things you want to address, you may want to have some comments or questions you want to either remember or follow up on, and then keeping track of the source of that information. You can keep track of what page that particular piece of information was on. So if you're reviewing, let's say you're reviewing in EIS or something like that, I think it'd be good to know sometimes those are hundreds of pages long. You don't want to just note that you've identified a particular issue from an EIS, then you have to comb through the whole thing again. You note the page, you can jump straight to it. And then it also can be helpful to, when you're reviewing the documents, you keep a separate folder and you highlight those sections, maybe make comments within the documents if you know you're going to come back to them. If there's links, so some of that information may be outside, and maybe not documents that you either don't feel the need to download or don't actually have access to. So you can include the links to those as well, and then any other additional information. This is a customizable spreadsheet, so you could add more things you want to keep track of. This is a combination scoping spreadsheet right here, you may choose to have an overarching one that has all of them, and then you may choose to sort it, let's say like A to Z, and then you may choose to just cut and paste like all the air ones into an air tab, the water ones into a water tab, waste ones, and whatever areas you're trying to cover. Um, Otherwise, you can just sort them and look at them here. So different ways to keep track of, organize, and manipulate this data. I think it takes a little bit of time to do, a little bit extra work, but I think it ends up saving a whole lot of time in the long run to make sure that you're staying on track, you're not duplicating efforts, and the scope of what you're trying to address within a particular law is actually going to be addressed. Okay, so as I mentioned, another critical step in this process, absolutely essential, and you may choose to do this off the bat, is reviewing the tribal constitution and other governing documents. Um, these these may provide information in many different areas you're going to want to understand. One particular area is what is the process for enacting and adopting a tribal law? Who is the body that is going to need to approve it? Is it your business committee, your tribal council, your executive committee, which could be an elected board, or is it the general council, or can both do it? So the general council, the entire tribal voting membership, does it need to go through them? I suppose it could be a different body as well. But it's important to know not only who needs to improve it, what's the process. Your tribal constitution may provide limitations on enforcement, penalties. It may provide information on the judiciary. There may be other documents. So your tribal constitution may grant the authority for the general council to draft legislation, but there may be a resolution by the general council that grants authority for the business committee or your tribal council, the elected executive committee, to actually uh, adopt tribal laws. And I've seen it. I've seen it in various ways. So these are important things you need to know who you're going to, because that's also who you're going to need to get support from to get this passed. And I think getting them involved, getting them on board, making sure that they are supportive of this from the very beginning is crucial, because you don't want to go through this whole process. And this is a lengthy, involved process of drafting a law, and then find out that you don't actually have the support from the people you need to authorize that law. There's other information you'll want to keep track of as well. And let me show you an example and a document to kind of consider. Another point here too is that you may want to review other tribal laws that may govern these processes as well. In the case of the Cabazon tribe, they had things of general applicability. They have a tribal code with all of their laws. The tribal code itself, at the very beginning, had the Constitution and other governing type documents, but the code provided information on like enforcement of the judiciary. So in kind of considering these things and keeping track of them. So this document is for a couple different purposes. Actually, let me come back to this document in a moment because it's relevant to the next section too. Okay, so the bulk of your work is probably going to come in the process of researching, reviewing similar laws, and drafting the law itself. So the process of, okay, well, I guess I'm stepping back to this real quick. I want to make sure I cover all these points. So this is back with the reviewing tribal constitution and other governing documents. I apologize that it's bouncing around a little bit. So I mentioned your articles of organization, your tribal constitution. There may be resolutions. Your tribe may have entered into treaties, tribal state compacts, or maybe gaming compacts. Just these, you want to talk to the tribal attorney, perhaps the tribal administrator, other people who may know about what documents are out there that may possibly have implications for adopting, enacting, enforcing, and implementing a tribal environmental law. So as I mentioned, that next step is going to be researching and reviewing similar laws. First, you want to start with the laws from your own tribe. When you review these, you want to look for potential conflicts, model language, provisions, or sections, because you don't want to draft a law that either, maybe if you review these other laws, you may see that some things you're trying to address is already addressed elsewhere effectively, or that if you are going to craft a law, maybe it's not addressed effectively in another law already, and that the law that you're planning on, that you want to draft, the scope of it is going to somehow conflict. So you want to make note of that because there's going to, at some point, you're going to need to either repeal it or somehow make those things in alignment. And I'll show you kind of an example or share an example of that a little later on. Also, in terms of model language, there might be, if you're trying to do a sanitary waste ordinance or something like that, then there might actually be a health and sanitation code that has some of the similar provisions under it that you're trying to address under your waste ordinance. And might be some information you can pull from there. There also may be boilerplate type provisions. So things like how is it, even how is it structured? So if you have a tribal code that has all of its laws, how is that structured? Is there a certain numerical order, a certain format to the code? Is there particular language for jurisdiction, particular language for sovereignty? And there's various kind of common sections that are going to need to be in almost every law. And if there's laws out there that are being effectively implemented by the tribe, then you'll probably want to use similar language for those. Beyond that, you're going to want to go and review, you're going to want to go and review other environmental laws from other tribes and municipalities. Because most likely, you're either revising something that doesn't address something you want to address, or you're creating this from scratch. And you don't want to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of laws out there that are accessible, not just from tribes, but from municipalities across the country. There's also federal and state laws and even international laws that may have provisions, language, sections that address the needs you're trying to, the issues you're trying to address, and they address them adequately and sufficiently. So there's really no need to try to formulate these. You just go look at different examples. And, in some cases you may find that some things you're trying to address, there are no good examples for how you want to address it. It's a very unique situation, or just the other laws out there just don't adequately address it. And I found that with the Cabazon project, there were a lot of areas where I found some good model language and maybe even just some good ideas. And there's some that there really was nothing else out there I could find in scouring all the laws that I could find, tribally across the country and even internationally that adequately address that particular issue or need. One example of that had to do with odors, and there was nothing that really addressed that very adequately, or at least in the way that the tribe was seeking to address it. And I did end up finding a good document done by Minneapolis that provided a lot of good approaches and techniques, and even some language I could draw from. So, when you're doing this research of similar environmental laws, there may be other documents that are not actually laws where you can get ideas and language from as well. And so, I ended up kind of getting ideas and sections and stuff from there, and essentially crafted an odor section within the Cabazon code. And then as you're going through these things, when you do kind of, you may find a document on the internet and you may kind of glance through it. Initially, you may go in depth at that time as well. You want to note and record the relevance of it. And it may also be beneficial that if a tribe has a particular law and you're like, this law nails it, this addresses exactly what I want to address. And it may be worthwhile contacting that particular tribe or municipality and asking them for their feedback. Ask them, you have this ordinance where I really like how it's drafted. I like the language. It's seeking to address this particular area. How is it working for you? What have been the challenges? Has it been challenged in court? So a quick example of that is one of the very first things I did that I essentially developed this process from was when I was in law school, the environmental law clinic, and was seeking to draft a non-conforming land use ordinance for National City. I went out and looked for examples of this ordinance from other municipalities, and I found that Santa Cruz, I believe it was Santa Cruz, another municipality in California, had a non-conforming land use ordinance that was perfect. It addressed the needs of National City exactly. So I did some ongoing legal research, and this may be something where if you are not a licensed attorney, you may you're going to want to seek the guidance, or you're going to need to have a licensed attorney do this type of legal research. But I went out and looked for any judicial review of any court rulings regarding that particular ordinance. And I did find one where it had been challenged in court and it was upheld. And I think I ended up reaching out to the municipality too and asking them. And aside from some minor tweaking, it didn't take a whole lot of work to provide National City with something that exactly met their needs. That was a bit of an ideal scenario. A lot of these situations, you may find language out there that doesn't exactly meet the needs, or just isn't worded the way you'd like it to be worded, or there may not be that perfect court case out there. And you don't. There isn't going to necessarily be exact court cases on everything as well, but that's when working with an attorney and making sure that you're not drafting something that's going to be nullified in court automatically or has already been challenged. That doesn't mean that if something is re-challenged in your jurisdiction that it's not, it doesn't mean that it's going to be overturned. But anyways, we're working with a qualified attorney will make you avoid, will help you to have somebody conduct that legal research and not develop a law that's going to be easily challengeable. And then during this process, maintaining a research log is, you don't want to duplicate your efforts. You don't want to, if you're working within the tribe and you're working on this, it's likely you have a lot going on. You're not probably going to be able to work on this straight. When I worked with the Cabazon, it was, it was an extensive code and it took several months to do, and I was working on it with most of my time. I had some other projects going on as well, but if you're within the tribe, you likely have other things you need to oversee and move forward. If you're in the environmental departments, you have other responsibilities. I mean, if you're coming back to this here and there to continue this process, if you're not organized, if you're not maintaining these research logs, if you're not maintaining this level of organization, you're going to forget what you found, and you're going to find yourself duplicating your efforts by researching the same stuff, reviewing the same stuff over and over again, and it's going to be frustrating if you're working on this a quarter of your time. If you're working on this half time, could be a process that could take years for you to do, and you're probably going to it may result in an inadequate code if it's not done thoroughly in that manner. During the process of researching and reviewing, you may choose to begin the drafting and revision, drafting or revision. If you don't have a law on the books or anything that addresses a particular issue, then you're probably drafting from scratch. If you have something the tribe has adopted in the past, let's say you're looking to do a NEPA or a TIPA environmental review type ordinance for your tribe, and they have one that is 10 years old, you want to look at that and see to what extent you can revise that. If it has been sitting on the shelf and it's never really been enforced, and likely you're probably going to scrap most of it and you're probably going to be drafting something from scratch. I've reviewed a lot of, I've reviewed many tribal laws out there, and a lot of them I can tell it's likely they're just sitting on a shelf because they don't. I can tell that they probably don't match reality. So if you have a law that just because you have a waste law doesn't mean you can enforce it because it may not actually adequately address the issues you're trying to address. It may not provide procedures and resources that match the actual procedures and resources you have in place or can actually develop. And your implementation of compliance measures may not match who you have that can do that, and let's say the forms and processes. So in drafting your tribal environmental law, you're going to be reviewing those relevant laws and templates in detail. So it might be those laws you found from other tribes and municipalities. It may be where you see some good language in some of the laws, the internal laws that the tribe already has. So making note of that language, of those provisions, of those sections as you're reviewing those is important, keeping track of those. And then to a certain extent cutting and pasting those things, but you're going to need to recraft the language and you're going to obviously need to change it to your situation, and you need to make sure that the language is consistent too. It's great if you can, so as I mentioned, you're cutting and pasting these things. The fewer models you can use, that may be the better. With the Cabazon Environmental Code, I didn't find, there maybe for particular areas I would find some that provided a good amount of comprehensive language that addressed the need. But in many cases, I had to splice. I had to extract language, provisions, and sections from many different sources, and then I also had to draft some of my own. But if you have fewer models that your laws out there that you're pulling language from, that can be better because they're likely going to use more consistent language. You don't want to have you don't want to have different wording, different words that are defined differently, and you want to have your overall kind of grammatical language and structure be similar. So that's where those fewer model laws and templates can be beneficial, but you do want to look at those. So just because it was drafted and because it's on the internet doesn't necessarily mean it's a good one. Doesn't mean you should pull language from it. It may be a situation where you found a good law, but then you contact a particular municipality and you find out that it's basically not working for them for one reason or another, just sitting on their shelf, and it's unenforceable based on their circumstances, which could be different from yours. But then editing all that language and drafting new language as needed. You'll want to be reviewing and revising these drafts. If this is not being drafted by a qualified attorney with experience in both tribal and environmental law, you're going to want to have regular legal review of this. And if you have an internal attorney, they may or may not feel comfortable with you drafting this. They may appreciate that assistance. Maybe they're too busy that so I don't think you have to be an attorney to put together some of this language, but you do need to work with an attorney to get this reviewed, to be involved in the process, to do the legal research that may be needed, who has experience in these areas. Because if you go to just a general counsel, either internally or externally, they may be familiar with tribal law, but environmental law is really unique. And if you didn't study it, if you don't have experience in it, then it's going to be something where things that are going to be obvious to an environmental attorney are not going to be obvious to that generalist without an extensive amount of research that they're not going to have time or even a willingness to conduct. And ultimately they may just sign off on it just because they're like, whatever, I just want to move this forward, I don't want to have this on my plate, and that's not going to be beneficial for anybody. So as I mentioned, you may be simultaneously doing this research, review, and drafting process. You may decide that if you're doing a waste code and it has different areas, let's say it has hazardous waste, it has solid waste, it has collection and management, it has facilities, solid waste facilities or landfills, like you may actually choose to kind of do your research, review, and drafting of these things one at a time. So, first focus on open burning, go through that, and then, then focused on illegal dumping. So it just depends. As you go and you're doing your research, you're going to find laws that have all these. So you just got to find the rhythm that works best for you, and you got to be willing to modify your approach and rhythm because just because one particular area of the law, uh, what was kind of effective in drafting that section may not work very well in another section. And I found in the latest Cabazon project that I was kind of shifting my approach throughout the project. So let me show you some resources associated and relevant to these. So first of all, that document that I showed you, that comparison of the tribal environmental code versus, the environmental code versus the tribal code. So in the situation of the Cabazon tribe, they had that, as I mentioned, they had a tribal code in place. And so I reviewed the Constitution, the tribal Constitution, the Articles of Organization, some relevant resolutions, and I went through the entire, I think, 300 to 400 page tribal code just to identify all potential areas of conflict and any other relevant information. So noting the powers of the General Counsel and Business Committee with respect to drafting and adopting laws. There was a public health and safety section that I had to make note of. It's fugitive dust and some waste-related things. There was potential conflicts with the laws that I was drafting. Also, the section about the tribe's judiciary system, what is the jurisdiction, and rules of civil procedures. And they also had a vehicle code that had something about hazardous materials. So it's important to know, under the judiciary system, does it have the enforcement mechanisms in place that are adequate to enforce the tribal environmental law? So does it provide for sufficient penalties and remedies? And in some cases it may not. So you may find that you're either referring or cross-referencing the enforcement provisions that are already in place, or you're drafting entirely separate ones for the environmental law that are adequate. But you got to make sure that they don't conflict. You got to make sure that they're not, they're constitutional and that they're otherwise not going to be able to be overturned or in conflict with other laws. So this is something where I noted the title, the chapter, the section. I didn't flesh this out, so I did flesh this out. So this thing was probably 100 or 200 lines long before when I noted the various sections that had possibly applicable language. I didn't outline every section. I only made note of the ones that had implications for the environmental code. I would then maybe put a little comments or pull out some of the language that I would cut and paste in here, and then add some additional comments about the implications or how I wanted to address it, whether it was a conflict or whether it had some type of relevance to the environmental law. And this is something that can be modified and customized to meet the needs and keep track of the information that you want to keep track of. Here is a research log and database that, so this is, I think, going to be very helpful to anybody that has the task of attempting to draft a tribal environmental law on their own, because within this document I have links to hundreds of tribal environmental laws and with general environmental laws, to air laws, water laws, waste laws, underground storage tanks, some covering hazardous substances. Through teaching the Tribal Codes Workshop and through the projects that I've worked on, I've accrued this database and I'm making it available to anybody who wants to make use of it. So this is a combination of a database for those resources, and as you're doing research and you come across different laws, then I think you'll want to add your own to this. but it also allows you to review those and to determine to what extent they have relevant and applicable language that possibly you can use within the tribal environmental law that you were drafting. So, in this, scrolls down and, as you can see, this goes down into even the waste sections down into the hundreds. It has a combination of federal, so tribal from across the country, federal, California state laws. It has ordinances from local jurisdictions. Some are within California, some just happen to be from an internet research where I found language that was relevant. And sometimes there's some resources that are not actually laws, but that have relevant information to those laws. It could be a study, so there's a lot of resources in here. So as you identify new resources, doing the title, the municipality, or whatever the source of that is, I like to keep track of the year of what it is. So if this says 1901, that this particular law was drafted, I'm probably gonna think maybe it's not gonna be very relevant. I may still look at it. That'd be interesting to see a law from 1901. I like to keep track of the number of pages too. That can sometimes help me understand how relevant it's going to be. If it just says one page, then it's a chance that it's not going to be very relevant, or at least I can keep track of that. I may do a preliminary review, is just scanning it and see if there's like let's see, I think on this page I put, well, I would actually add, and I think I've had before, preliminary relevance, like for my preliminary review relevance. The overall relevance is after doing your in-depth review and deciding how much information it has. And then the next several columns are associated with the scoping. So, when you're doing your scoping process, identifying waste issues that you want to address within this code, you're going to enter those here. And I have several here as an example, but you should be entering your own. You can expand and decrease this list as needed. But there's also going to be, general sections, provisions you're going to want to address too, and you may find model language for when you're doing your research. Things like applicability, which is, kind of the scope and jurisdiction, definitions, maybe the purpose, declarations. So there's a lot of areas under waste. And, as you're doing your research, you may not actually address all these things within the Cabazon Environmental Code. Like, there wasn't really something that addressed, well, I guess there was something that did address used oil to a certain extent, but some of these areas are not addressed within the code, but I thought may be addressed, and I wanted to find example language to provide and share. So you go through this process, and even through the process of reviewing other tribes' laws, you're still scoping. So you may identify issues when you're doing your research that are things you didn't think of. You're like, oh, you know what? Well, you just mentioned used oil, waste vegetable oil, like that causes huge issues with our wastewater treatment plant. It'd really be beneficial if we regulated how people disposed of used oil. Like, we'd want to prevent them or discourage them from dumping it down into the sewer system, into down their drains that then goes into the sewer system and into our wastewater treatment plants. So you can continue to modify that list. But this is more, this list right here is the sections, or more focused on sections and areas you want to cover. Your other scoping document will be broader than this, possibly. And then being able to keep track of comments. Here are all the links to different things out there. And then this is still customizable. You can add other information to your heart's content here. And I just, this is doing this because I have this spreadsheet frozen so that I can see the stuff on top at all times. If I just want to see the name of the law, I might freeze it right here so that I can see a little bit more when I scroll over. And then I have them for all these different areas. I also, when I was doing some research, I made note and provided the links to the law review articles and other resources that I found. And these can be beneficial in identifying other laws out there or different approaches possibly to environmental laws. For the most part, I found these useful to identify other laws that were existing out there that I then wanted to go and review. But feel free to look at these and see whether they have anything relevant for your situation, may provide some good guidance. So also during the process of drafting, I think it's important to keep track of what you drafted. And I have another template that I've, it's not only important to keep track of it for while you're doing it, to keep that organized, but it can be very beneficial to kind of have an annotated code where you know where the information came from, when it was drafted, how it was drafted, so that if you need to update it later on, you can come back and look at that information. So let me show you that template. So this is, this, what I'm showing you right now here, which I'm probably going to delete most of this in the template I put online, is more the structure of the Cabazon environmental code. And this was fleshed out a lot more, where I had lots of model laws here. I had the status, I had applicable federal laws, and sometimes some comparison comments and notes. But this is essentially an outline of every aspect of the code. So there's a general section of it. There's the environmental review ordinance, the air ordinance, waste ordinance, and then the underground storage tanks and hazardous substances ordinance. So this section, this has kind of the general boilerplate provisions. It also has the sections for the environmental commission, environmental administrator, enforcement, and judicial review under here as well. The environmental review ordinance is in a different section. So for each one, if I pulled language from somewhere, or I just saw something and it gave me an idea, I tended to just make a note of it. So I've deleted most of those, and just because it was relevant for this particular code doesn't mean it's going to be relevant for your situation. Everything really needs to be done on a case-by-case basis. So that's like why even just the Cabazon environmental code isn't something that, even though I put a lot of thought, and I think it's very well crafted, and it could meet tribal, a lot of tribal needs with modification. Your circumstances may be different. So you really need to, when you're reviewing these models out there, you need to put a lot of thought into how they're going to be implemented, how well they do suit your needs. And just because they work well for somebody else doesn't mean they're going to work well for your situation. One that's a little more specific, the air section, things like ambient air quality standards, fugitive dust, water has a bunch of different areas. So there's water quality, wellhead protection, water use. So this column was going to be the section. This is going to be the section title. And aside from just being annotation and being able to have a history of how this was developed, this is also something you can share if somebody just wants an overview of what's in the law. I also include a table of contents in the law too, which I think gives a good overview. The status, what stage is this in, and this you can put different, doesn't have to be one of these. If there's a model law, like what is that model law? I didn't put the links here because those links are in the research document that I just showed you before, that research login database. But if I put the model law in here, I can then look back and see what about that I liked, or might just, like I said, it might just provide an idea. If there's an applicable federal law, so if you're doing something regarding point source discharges, you may want to have the federal laws that are associated with MPDS permits. You may want some comments about comparison of your law to those laws, like how is your law different than the ones you pull the language from, if you did pull the language, and then keeping track of other notes. So another customizable spreadsheet that I think is going to help you just stay organized both now and into the future. As you can see, I like to do these things right. I think if you utilize this process and these templates, you are more likely to do this right, to do this thoroughly, to address the needs correctly, and then when things need to change, you have the resources to more easily make those adaptations. So another stage in the process is that presentation and review. So presenting this may be an ongoing thing. Who you present it to is going to be something you need to get approval for. It may just be the tribal leadership you're presenting it to. You may have a steering committee. You may be presenting at the very end. You may be presenting in the very beginning, or both, or even all times throughout the process. But it's good to have a game plan about when and how this is going to be presented, what's going to be presented. So is the laws itself going to be presented? Is the possible issues going to be presented? And then who's reviewing it? You're definitely going to want a legal review happening throughout, and definitely at the very end. You're going to need the final sign off by an attorney that whoever the decision makers are trust to do that. And hopefully it's somebody who has the relevant tribal and environmental law experience. And are you presenting this just to the elected executive committee, tribal council, or are you presenting this to the full general council? Um, the next step from there is going to be enacting or getting the law adopted and approved and adopted. If you're at this point, and that comes down to what were those requirements according to the tribal constitution and other governing documents. So hopefully you've already identified what the process is, who's voting on it, how many votes you need to get it passed, and what are those processes and procedures to do that. If you're at the point where you're bringing this in front of whoever that decision-making body is, and you're not if you don't feel confident that it's going to get passed, then I don't think my recommendation is do not proceed with having them vote on it. I think if you're at the point where you're trying to get a code adopted, a tribal environmental law adopted, and you don't have the support where you feel confident that it's going to get approved, then you have not done enough in these prior stages. You have not done enough of this presentation review. You may have not done enough of the scoping, kind of identifying those needs and gotten everybody on the same page. So I don't think that you should proceed with this until you feel confident that it's actually going to get approved. Because if you proceed with that and they deny it, then you're kind of going back to the drawing board, and you may have developed a negative impression regarding this particular law. And so that you didn't address, and it may create some kind of impressions and stigmas that you're going to now have to work extra hard to overcome. If you are confident it still does get rejected or gets voted down, that doesn't mean that it's not valid. It means there's some concerns out there that need to be identified and addressed. So you do need to go back to some of these stages, do some more scoping, do some more public presentation, gain some feedback, get some review, and identify what needs to be addressed to possibly get it passed, or to to determine that this isn't actually going to be passed. I'm not going to be able to get the support for that. So you need to do your due diligence to determine that. There may be so the tribal constitution should provide a process for getting this reviewed and adopted, and that will apply to most laws. If you're trying to get regulations adopted pursuant to a tribal environmental law, that may be a different process. So one example is the Clean Air Act was adopted by Congress, which is the U.S. federal government's legislative body. There are also Clean Air Act regulations that have been adopted by the EPA under the Clean Air Act. So the Clean Air Act has given the EPA the authority to adopt regulations that are essentially rules and additional requirements that are consistent with the Clean Air Act. In order for the EPA to get those adopted, they have to follow the Administrative Procedures Act, do notice and comment, get that public feedback to get it adopted, to go through that process. Your tribe may have something similar to that. It may be a situation where a regulation still needs to go to tribal council. So that's, do your due diligence, find out what these processes and procedures are, talk to your tribal attorney and other people there, find out what you need to do to get whatever laws they are adopted. And then from there, you're going to be implementing the tribal environmental law. So another template I want to share with you is a next steps template, which I had developed in working with the Cabazon tribe to. So you've developed the tribal environmental law, but there's still a lot that needs to be done. So it might be that you've drafted it and you still need to get it adopted. That could be a next step if that's where you're at. Um, all these templates I'm sharing, they had a lot more than what's in here. They had a lot more steps, a lot more information for the most part. Um, when I post these online, they're not going to have any information. You can come back to this and see, for some examples of what type of information could be included in it. But I'm going to have kind of clean blank templates for you to use. So in this case, there's a series of next steps that are important for the tribe to keep track of, and these series of next steps may be something that occurs over the process of even several years to all get done, and they have varying levels of priority. So in the case of your code is still a draft, you're going to need to get it reviewed, finalized, and adopted. Another example is if your code assigns an environmental code administrator, you may need a resolution designated them, or if there's environmental commissioners, you may need to get them designated by resolution if that's the process that's been prescribed by the environmental law. If you have a tribal code and your tribe the tribal leadership wants the environmental code to be a part of it, or whatever environmental law to be a part of it, you may need to eventually embed that into the tribal code, so making sure that it matches up in terms of its numbering, its format, so on and so forth. This may not be critical to get it initially adopted, but it may be kind of a procedural type thing that you need to do, a formatting thing you need to do later on. And there may be a series of regulations that you need to adopt to administer, implement, and enforce. So there might be some gaps, there may be some areas where additional information and requirements need to be fleshed out. And that may be something there's certain things right away need to be fleshed out. There may be some that later on, down the road, you find you need additional regulations that are within the scope of the environmental law. And then, so the difference between these is the required regulations. So there may be some required regulations that you have, and there may be some other regulations that were not required to be adopted under the code. You may decide if allowable to adopt later on. Actually, let me come back to that sheet real quick. Explain it. So you're going to have possibly a task. I put in here the environmental code authority to show where the authority is, or what is the relevant section and provision within the code to that particular task. What is the urgency? Excuse me, whose responsibility is that? So is it going to be the tribal council? Is it going to be environmental commission? Is it going to be the tribal administrator? Is it going to be all of them? If you want to keep track of estimate your number of hours, what time frame it needs to be done within, and then even some additional notes. You may or may not have some fee schedules in place. So if you have some permits, or if you plan on charging fees for permits, if you plan on charging fees for administrative and judicial review, you may need to develop fee schedules for these. So there may be a series of those, and then you may want to have the name, the purpose of the fee, what is that code authority that actually allows you to develop that fee, has it been established or not, and then your notes. The permits, similar to the fees, do you need to develop, what permits can you issue under the code or your law? What is the authority that's associated with that permit? Have there been procedures created for issuing both procedures and forms for issuing those permits? And then what are some notes associated with that? And there's some permits that are associated with the Cabazon code. One thing I also thought was beneficial to include was any inspections that are required under the code to be done by the environmental code administrator, and then what is that inspection or its purpose, where is that authority, have those procedures and forms been created, and then what frequency is it needs to be done, once a year, every 3 years, and then your notes on those. If there are regulations that need to be adopted or can be adopted, so in this case, this is ones that were either required or maybe just were mentioned that the administrator could draft, or that these regulations could be adopted, but they didn't have to be. So the name and purpose of that, what the authority is, whether they're required or not, whether the code itself specifically says that these will be adopted. If it doesn't, then that would be a no. If it's been drafted and adopted, and then your other notes associated with that. And the last thing I did here was just kind of created a little outline of different issues that I want to review in the process of doing the environmental review, and checklist. That environmental review process really is, if it's like a gateway, if there's going to be an environmental impact pursuant to a particular activity, that a person would have to fill out this checklist and submit that, and then it would identify the environmental program or whoever is administering this code to whether there other permits need to be sought, or other activities or actions need to be taken, or there's just other concerns that need to be addressed. Okay, so now let me just kind of run through Cabazon Environmental Code, and I'm not going to go through, this is I think 93 pages long, so, and it's very, there's a lot of sections here. It covers a lot of different areas and still provides for more detailed regulations. I just want to pull out and kind of show you some key areas, considerations. As I mentioned, some things were some novel approaches that I took with these things. They get around some of the tribes jurisdictional challenges, and I'll just kind of explain these in more detail. So in the general provisions section, one thing was that I did find some conflicting laws on the books already in the tribal, the tribe's general code, and so the tribal code is going to need a bit of work before this can be integrated into it, and that probably should be done all at once. It's going to be a bit of an undertaking, so I created an automatic repealer of anything conflicting within the tribal code, or any laws conflicting. So those laws now are no longer, or once this is adopted, those laws are no longer effective. However, it really is important to eventually address those and to clean up and readopt a tribal code that does not have those conflicting laws, because otherwise it will just be confusing. Like, somebody will not may read the tribal code and think that those are requirements, and if they didn't read the environmental code too, they would not know that there was a repealer of those particular laws. So the establishment of an environmental commission and some of their powers and duties. I'm not going to get down into the language of these, but in terms of powers and duties, the environmental commissions can. The environmental commission in this case is really the administrative hearing body. So if an enforcement action has been taken by the administrator, somebody authorized by the administrator, and somebody appeals it or challenges that a particular decision made by the administrator, they would then go to an administrative review hearing, which is conducted by the environmental commission. So they have that authority. The environmental code administrator has the authority to draft regulations. The environmental commission has and they have to submit the draft regulation to the Cabazon Environmental Commission. The Environmental Commission has then the authority to review that and make recommendations to the tribal council. So the process is similar to creating other laws, but this is the approach we took here that best met this tribe's needs. You may have a situation where the law itself maybe grants a sub body to actually approve those regulations themselves. So it really, I think, in determining the powers and duties of a commission and an environmental administrator, it's going to determine on your tribe's comfort level with how much discretion they have in performing particular duties. Do you want to give them broad discretion in issuing penalties and remedies, or do you want to make it narrow and more prescriptive? I'll actually provide an example of that in a moment. So the Environmental Protection Fund is another thing as well that I thought was important to have in here. So, if you're doing an enforcement action, you have a penalty. If there's no clause that ensures that where that funding is going to be spent, then that would just probably go into the tribe's general fund and they could spend it on anything. But your tribe may want to ensure that those funds stay within an environmental protection program for enforcement, compliance, education outreach, and other related activities. And I would definitely be an advocate of that, especially somebody who was an environmental director before. So in terms of enforcement, this should provide some authorities to go and review records, provide some ability to enter and inspect. One thing I didn't highlight that I want to note here was a duty to report. So there's kind of two separate duties. There's a duty to report and a duty to correct. The duty to correct is somebody who causes a particular violation of the code has a duty to correct and mitigate the damages caused by that immediately. But the duty to report actually is applicable to anybody. So if somebody witnesses a violation under this code, they have a duty to report that. And if they do not report that, then they are technically in violation of the environmental code. In terms of civil penalties and remedies, this is something that's actually fairly broad and discretionary. There's a lot of different mechanisms in here, so it's more of like a range of, it could be, depending on what the issue is, it could be, $100, $500 to several $1,000s. And it doesn't state like, first violation is this amount of money, second violation is that amount of money. That really, comes to the comfort level of the tribe and how much authority and discretion they want to give to the people who are doing the administration and enforcement, and even the judiciary or the administrative review body. I think that there's a certain amount of flexibility needs to be granted because environmental damage can be can be egregious, and you don't want to have something that says, first violation is $100, second violation is $500, when they've, dumped some toxic waste and they're harming a lot of people and a significant amount of the environment. In addition to those penalties, you can have remedies where they have to restore the damage and the situation to what it was prior to the violation. So, if somebody did dump a whole bunch of toxic waste and you happen to have $100 fine for that, but it can create a vast amount of environmental damage, if you craft your code correctly, then you may you still can go after them for those damages and go after them to restore that. And you can make it where you have if they do not correct it themselves, you have the ability to restore those areas yourself and then charge them for it. And then there are certain requirements. This kind of outlines all the process for the environmental commission hearings and what they focus on. So it's kind of a step-by-step process of even how they hear a particular issue, what information they gather, in what order they review it. So the environmental review ordinance is chapter 5. So as you can see, this structure aligns with the tribe's code structure. The chapters themselves, in some cases, the chapters I'm calling ordinances if they are focused on a specific area. Another thing about this too is these general sections, so kind of 1 through 4, are more of a general applicability to all other chapters and all other ordinances, which could be expanded on a later date. Instead of developing a new enforcement section for every single law that you developed. I like this code approach where this enforcement section is applicable to all subsequent environmental laws that are then integrated into the environmental code. And same thing with the judicial review section and the other ones above. So this is the environmental review ordinance that provides for an environmental review process. It can be similar to like a NEPA type review or a CEQA type review if you're in California, but it also can be different. I've helped them develop a process and a checklist for these, but this is really kind of a gateway. One challenge I think that a lot of tribal environmental departments have is about being informed, notified, and having the ability to timely respond and provide input on a particular activity that may have environmental impacts. I think it happens, I've heard too often that, and I experienced the same thing myself, where you look out your window one day and see a building being constructed that you had no idea about, and you're the environmental director, and so this environmental review process can make it so that those types of projects and activities have to flow through the environmental department. You may not have specific laws and regulations, but at least being aware of it is important. And it may not be that I saw the building going up and I want to regulate it somehow. I just may, there may be some issues or some opportunities that I want to make sure that people are aware of that could maybe make it less costly for somebody, could actually benefit them somehow, or some particular sensitive resources are nearby that we want to make sure that they're aware of and they protect. So it may not be that they're being regulated, but just be that they're being educated on the implications of their actions, or even educated on some opportunities they may not have known about. This also has a general environmental permit. If according to the environmental review, there's determined that there's going to be some type of environmental impact that the tribe wants to address, then they will need to get an environmental permit, and they may need to get other permits as well, but that's more like a general purpose environmental permit, and it could cover areas that are not covered elsewhere. So the environmental review process allows you to identify impacts. Let's say there's some habitat impacts, and you could require an environmental permit for those habitat impacts, and those habitat impacts aren't necessarily covered by anywhere else in the environmental code. So it's a way to to regulate issues that you don't necessarily have specific ordinances or laws in place for. And that was the approach here. Under the air ordinance, some things I want to point out here. I'm going to go down to this language. Is actually the Cabazon ambient air quality standards, a bit of a novel approach. Was Cabazon do not have their own ambient air quality standards at this time, but and they would like their ambient air quality standards to always be in alignment with the strictest standards that are out there. Cabazon is in the South Coast Air Quality Management District, which is one of the hottest air quality districts in the country in terms of pollution. It's it's right near LA, so there's a lot of air pollution going on. There's some non-attainment, so it's and then California also has stricter standards, and then a lot of the federal standards currently as well. So the way this was crafted was that the Cabazon's ambient air quality standards will automatically be the most stringent of the following standards. If they develop their own, and those are stricter than either national or California, then for each particular pollutant, it would default to the Cabazon. If the national is stricter in for any of the criteria or other pollutants that are covered under the ambient air quality standards, then those would be that particular area would be the default. And then same thing for California. I think for the most part, California probably is going to be the default for now. But this is, each pollutant is considered separately. And kind of the same thing for the attainment, designation of attainment, non-attainment, or unclassifiable. The most stringent classification will apply. Most reservations are considered unclassifiable, and they're subject to federal standards. In this case, the Cabazon tribe, with the air quality concerns and air quality issues, they want to have the strictest standards to both maintain better relationships and with the surrounding jurisdiction of in California, but also to provide the maximum protections for their citizens within the reservation. So let me scroll down. So some other notable things in here are the incorporation of federal regulations by reference. So there's two things in here I want to point out. I'm going to jump down to these two so I remember the particular language. So I just mentioned those ambient air quality standards. One thing about this is that those, as of right now, or when this gets adopted, the Cabazon ambient air quality standards are going to be equivalent to California standards in some cases. For air permits issued by the EPA, either for minor sources, Title V permits, there's a requirement in their code right now that somebody, if a permit is issued by the EPA, it must incorporate and comply with the Cabazon ambient air quality standards and air basin designations. This means that if you have a Title V source, or somebody seeking to construct a Title V source within the Cabazon reservation, they will need to have the EPA issue them a Title V permit that incorporates the Cabazon ambient air quality standards, which includes those stricter California standards. To not do so would be a violation of this particular law. So it is not a violation of federal law. This doesn't make this a federal requirement to do this, but if they, and so, the only recourse the tribe has is under their own laws. But once the person does get an EPA issued permit with these stricter standards, those stricter standards are now enforceable under federal laws. So the EPA would have to enforce those stricter standards. And so anybody can request that the EPA issue them a permit with more stringent standards. So this is essentially forcing the people subject to these laws within the reservation to pursue those stricter standards. So this is a bit of a workaround, because if your tribe wants to adopt stricter water quality or air standards without going through the treatment as a state process, this gives them the ability to do so and to have some teeth behind it. This was a novel approach that I have not seen out there, that I ended up essentially creating for this particular situation. And the other portion of this is that the federal laws, the federal air laws, including the new minor new source review rules for tribes, have been adopted and automatically incorporated into the tribal environmental code, the Cabazon environmental code. And now what this means is that the tribe reserves the right to administer permitting, inspection, and enforcement, and all other authorities over any person or activity subject to the federal regulations, the federal minor new source rule regulations, minor new source review regulations. And that a violation of those regulations is a violation of the Cabazon Environmental Code and is enforceable by the tribe according to this title. So it doesn't mean that the tribe is enforcing it according to federal law. It means the tribe is enforcing it according to their own law. The EPA simultaneously could administer, enforce, and issue citations at the same time, and these would actually be completely separate actions that could actually occur. So another kind of unique way to incorporate laws by reference that I think suits tribal situations a little better than anything I've seen out there. I'm not going to talk about much under the water quality. A lot of similar stuff. The water quality standards is similar to the air standards, but the situation is a little bit different because just the nature of air versus water. An air basin covering the reservation is a more distinguishable. Uh, Waterway segments are not as easily definable and able to be associated with adjacent ones as air basins are. But in general, it does still default to the strictest, in that those would be incorporated into any NPDES permit, which would similar to how the tribe's ambient air quality standards would have to be incorporated into any EPA issued air permits. The wellhead protection just provided a buffer for wellhead areas of 1,000 feet, which is a bit of a safe number, but there may be other studies and things you can do to define more appropriate wellhead protection areas. And then some septic system requirements. There's two separate requirements. One is for somebody to have their septic system professionally inspected and pumped at least once every 3 years, and there's a separate inspection requirement that the administrator, the code administrator the environmental code administrator must go out and inspect the septic system at least once per year. So those are completely different inspection requirements. Under waste, the resource recovery and source reduction section isn't really a requirement. It says that regulations may be adopted implementing requirements for things like recycling and source reduction, but as of right now, it's just encouraged. And then there's some permit requirements for both solid waste management operations, meaning transportation, collection, and then there's separate requirements for facilities, including things like engineering studies, and then insurance requirements, and even having an engineer review each year with a report produced on the lifespan. Under hazardous waste, one unique thing I want to point out here is in California, California has hazardous waste that is not considered hazardous waste under RCRA, and the tribe wanted to protect against people taking waste off the reservation into California that was not considered RCRA hazardous waste. They basically wanted them to be in compliance with California's hazardous waste, non-RCRA hazardous waste laws as they go across the boundaries. So that's kind of was a unique way of addressing that situation. It more said that they would have to be in compliance when they're transporting the waste. I incorporated the federal underground storage tanks regulations, and then just another area I want to point out in this case, these hazardous substances regulations are not fully comprehensive. They're just kind of addressing possible releases and then just the storage and management of hazardous waste. And the best laws I found to address it in the ways that the Cabazon tribe wanted to address it was actually under the International Fire Code. And there's actually a 2015 version of the International Fire Code, but that one is actually not readily available online. So I had them adopt the 2012 because that can be found online more easily. And then the OSHA hazardous substance regulations are more for handling them in the workplace, and there's a certain amount, there's some other requirements for releasing and reporting hazardous chemical spills and just if there's substances on site. Okay, so the last thing I want to, not the very last, but this is going to be, so we're nearing the end of this presentation. I'm going to show you the environmental review checklist and then I have a couple closing things I want to go through with you. So I mentioned that environmental review checklist, which essentially is that gateway and helps the tribal environmental department kind of keep abreast of what's going on and make sure that they're able to stay on top of it and address it in a timely manner. And so there's 3 separate environmental checklist forms that I developed for the Cabazon tribe. This is kind of the general questionnaire for general information, and then it has basic questions about the activity to give a sense of what's involved, if there's any other permits that are going to be required, a couple pages long. The bulk of the checklist is this spreadsheet right here. It is, it basically, what it is, it's, let me unfreeze it so you can see. So this checklist aligns with all the provisions and kind of issues trying to be addressed by the environmental code and then some. So, first off the bat, will this cause any emission of any pollutant into the outdoor ambient air? Yes, maybe, or no. And then it has an environmental code reference so that the person can see where that particular question, what it's associated with within the environmental code. And if somebody does answer yes to these questions, then they have to go to Form 3 and provide more detail on the yes or the maybe. So this goes through all different areas. There's the water, waste, air, hazmat, and then some general questions, some regarding the habitat and even endangered and threatened species. So even though endangered and threatened species are not covered by the code directly, they are indirectly covered by the environmental review and general environmental permit if there are going to be any impacts on those. And even cultural and historic resources is addressed within this context too. All right, so I want to just share a little bit. I mean, the whole purpose of this, not the whole purpose, I want my goal and purpose in this workshop and providing, I'm sorry, this presentation is to, I learned a lot as I go through these processes, and I want to help other tribes benefit from this. I want to make these resources readily available. At the same time, like I hoping for the opportunity to work directly with some tribes. I can only serve so many tribes, obviously, in this work, so I want to identify opportunities directly to serve tribes and then provide some resources to help other tribes in pursuing this. So I want to just review a few considerations of and benefits of to working with Prosper, whether this is a good fit or whether you have a need for this or not. So a few just kind of general considerations. If your tribe doesn't have access to an attorney with environmental and tribal law experience and expertise, then I believe that I may be a good fit for your needs. If you have limited staff time and capabilities in these areas, then this is also another good consideration. I mean, it really is important to be aware that if you want to develop an effective environmental law, it's going to take some time. It's going to take a significant amount of time. I mean, we're talking possibly, for something as in-depth as the Cabazon Environmental Code took me hundreds of hours to do. And I'm a trained, qualified attorney in these areas. So for somebody without that experience trying to do this, I'm going to say you're probably going to at least have to double that to do that. I mean, I'm hoping that these resources that I'm providing make it easier for you to do. At the same time too, as I've developed these, I actually think I could do this more efficiently moving forward. But it's still, an in-depth environmental code that has, nine, I think the one I did had, I think 9, 10 chapters in it. That's 100 pages long. That's going to be a significant amount of time. You're just focused on one area. You just want to do an open burn ordinance. That's not going to take nearly as much time. An open burn ordinance is actually an article within the air ordinance. So, if we want to talk about areas that are being covered under the Cabazon Environmental Code, there's probably, 25, 30 or more different areas that you could be very distinct ordinances on their own. So it's a time-consuming, complex process. It's important to make sure that everything you're doing lines up. So I went through and reviewed this multiple times, make sure the language was consistent, made sure it was correct. I have internal cross-references built in there that I had to make sure aligned. They're actually linkable as well, so you can more easily navigate the document. And then, going back and reviewing the other laws. So, you're going to need to have an attorney involved in this at some point. And then also, you're going to need to have some available funding to be able to work with us on this project. And then the desire to draft and adopt an environmental code quickly. I think that I have the ability probably to do this as quickly, possibly as quickly as it could be done, just in terms of my process and experience and knowledge, both of tribal environmental laws, but also my experience of being a tribal environmental director and kind of knowing what's going to be most effective and knowing what the, what that on the ground process is of getting this through and what considerations need to be made. Benefits are going to be that that I'm a qualified attorney with that on the ground environmental experience. I'm not sure you're going to find any other attorney out there who's also worked as a tribal environmental director. I believe that I have the ability to develop the highest quality environmental code that you're possibly going to develop in the shortest time possible. That doesn't mean that a high quality environmental code can't be developed in a short period of time. And I just, because I do this process, because I have this knowledge and this experience, I just believe that I have the ability to accomplish your essentially expertly craft this the first time around, avoiding an ineffective code or something that needs major update. I mean, the worst case scenario, is that you adopt something that ends up just going sitting on the shelf that nobody ends up referring to because it's just not workable. I can help you avoid that. I will make sure you have something that is directly aligns with your needs, with your situation, and if it, when it needs to be updated, which all codes are going to need to be updated from time to time, that they're minor updates, or they're expanding the scope of it rather than redoing parts of it, or essentially redoing the whole thing. And lastly, just the thorough documentation and the valuable compliance tools and templates that I have and will continue to develop. So, the tools and stuff like that I've developed, I will customize those for your situation. There might be additional kind of tools, templates, compliance, forms, procedures, and stuff like that that I have and will do, but it helps to having that on the ground environmental experience. I know a better understanding than most attorneys will in terms of in practice, how is this going to actually work? How is it going to be effective? And how is it going to accomplish what we're trying to accomplish? Lastly, I just want to share with you some other services that Prosper Sustainably offers. I mentioned some of these in the beginning. In addition to code drafting, the planning and strategy development services, whether that's doing a strategic plan or developing an EPA tribal environmental plan. Strategic planning and tribal environmental plans are some of my favorite things to do. Love to work with you on those, and I think the value I add there is in addition to having a similar organized process in pursuing those, also just have a lot of ideas and resources that I'm aware of that may be beneficial to you proceeding along those lines. And as you're doing strategic planning, I think it's always helpful to have an outside perspective, and also to have somebody who's guiding you through that too. So if you're an environmental director and feel like you want to do strategic planning on your own, the only challenge to that is getting your people to open up to you and identify the real issues and opportunities. Maybe some of the cultural stuff in terms of your organizational culture that is difficult to be aware of. So having a third party do that with you can help uncover those challenges and opportunities that you couldn't otherwise uncover, in addition to being kind of a guiding pace car through the process and making sure it continues to move forward and is done in an organized manner. Grant writing and management, with the CHUMASH and beyond that, I've probably secured almost $5 million in, with securing probably 45 plus grants. Program development and management, project management, business planning type activities, and you can find all these on my website. So thank you very much for taking the time to watch this video, and I hope it provided valuable information. The resources are going to be posted, are available on my website, prospersustainably.com. If you go under resources, scroll down, you'll be able to find them. And if you are interested in discussing possibly working with Prosper Sustainably, please reach out to me. If I can help you, great. If I can't help you, I will try to share some other resources that may meet your needs as well. So it's been a pleasure, and I look forward to sharing more resources with you in the future. Thank you.